G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. January 26, 2018. And the kangaroo grass, the native pasture, is still growing here on the bit of Australia where I pay the rates. Not so out there in the badlands of the sheep farm. It's a terribly divisive date. It's the 26th of January. Officially, it's a public holiday, a great celebration, because on the 26th of January 1788 saw the arrival of the first fleet in Port Jackson, New South Wales. It was the result of Britain's attempts to clear out her overcrowded jails and convict hulks by deportation of the prisoners to other parts of the world. Although there is some doubt as to the actual figures, 568 male and 191 female prisoners were embarked in the 6 transports. The voyage out was remarkably free of navigational problems, and the ships arrived in Botany Bay within 48 hours of each other. From embarkation to arrival at Port Jackson, 36 men and 4 women had died. Most of these deaths were from diseases brought into the ships by convicts infected before boarding. The largest ship was 452 tonnes. The smallest ship was 274 tonnes. Here we see the first fleet at anchor in Port Jackson, evening 26 January 1788. HMS Sirius and the brig-rigged sloop Supply accompanied the 9 transports carrying the first convicts, so already our 9 ships are up to 11. From England to Australia, after assembling in Botany Bay, the fleet moved to Port Jackson to found the first settlement of Sydney Cove. The ships had sailed from England on the 13th of May 1787 and had made calls at Tenerife, Rio de Janeiro and the Cape. That's Cape of Good Hope. After a voyage of 9 months, the crew must have felt a sense of security and relaxation once they were at anchor and had a harbour furl been put on the sails. Okay, January 26 celebrates the arrival of the British Imperial Colonial Fleet of Invasion and Occupation. It has nothing to do with Captain Cook, who had been commanded to go to Tahiti in order to watch the transit of Venus and then to see if he could find something on the east coast of New Holland. A commission which he duly executed in his 3-masted bark Endeavour. And while he was here, he said this in writing: "From what I have said of the natives of New Holland, they may appear to some to be the most wretched people upon earth, but in reality they are far more happier than we Europeans, being wholly unacquainted not only with the superfluous, but the necessary conveniences so much sought after in Europe. They are happy in not knowing the use of them. They live in a tranquillity which is not disturbed by the inequality of condition. The earth and sea of their own accord furnishes them with all things necessary for life. They covet not magnificent houses, household stuff, etc. They live in a warm and fine climate and enjoy a very wholesome air, so that they have very little need of clothing, and this they seem to be fully sensible of. In short, they seem to set no value upon anything we gave them, nor would they ever part with anything of their own for any one article we could offer them. This, in my opinion, argues that they think themselves provided with all the necessaries of life and that they have no superfluities." However, it turns out that this alleged hunter-gatherer's paradise on earth was not the pure, fortuitous, random work of nature. This was an estate, the biggest estate on earth. How Aborigines Made Australia, by Bill Gamage. You want to figure out how it was done? You want to learn something? Get a hold of a copy of this. When it was published, it won the Prime Minister's Prize for non-fiction. So it did. Introduction to the Australian estate. Scroll down here to the bottom. This book rests on 3 facts about 1788. 1. Unlike the Britain of most early observers, about 70% of Australia's plants need or tolerate fire, see Chapter 3. Knowing which plants welcome fire and when and how much was critical to managing land. Plants could then be burnt and not burnt in patterns, so that a post-fire regeneration could situate and move grazing animals predictably by selectively locating the feed and shelter they prefer. 2. Grazing animals could be shepherded in this way because apart from humans they had no serious predators. Only in Australia was this so. 3. There was no wilderness. The law and ecological philosophy enforced by religious sanction compelled people to care for all their country. People lived and died to ensure this, Chapter 4. The law prescribed that people leave the world as they found it. 1788 practice was therefore conservative, but this did not impose static means. On the contrary, an uncertain climate and nature's restless cycles demanded myriad practices shaped and varied by local conditions. Management was active, not passive, alert to season and circumstance, committed to a balance of life. The chief ally was fire. Today, almost everybody accepts that in 1788 people burnt random patches to hunt or lure game. In fact, this was no haphazard mosaic making, but a planned, precise, fine-grained local caring. Random fire simply moves people's guesses about game around the country. Effective burning, on the other hand, must be predictable. People needed to burn and not burn and to plan and space fires appropriately. Of course, how a pattern was made varied according to terrain and climate. Heath, rainforest and spinifex each require different fire, yet in each the several purpose of fire remained essentially the same. A plant needs fire to seed, an animal likes a forest edge, a man wants to make a clearing. Means were local, ends were universal. Successfully managing such diverse material was an impressive achievement. Making from it a single estate was a breathtaking leap of imagination. And so when the Imperial Euro peons, that's landless, ignorant peasant, a peon, from Europe comes Euro peons. When the landless, ignorant peasants came here, they looked at the biggest estate on earth and they proclaimed it terra nullius. They said that it was a wilderness, that there was nobody here who owned it, despite the fact that their first settlers and surveyors always finding and recording in their first maps, plans and drawings the fact that templates existed. When Aboriginal people wanted to make a clearing in the forest, they burnt until they got a clearing in the forest. And they put the grass beside the water with the trees off on the hills by selective burning. So when you hear white Euro peon descended politicians claiming today that overall British imperial invasion and occupation of Australia was a good thing, they claim that because they have been raised to embrace a state of studied ignorance, which we call the white blindfold view of bowdlerised, jingoised, censored, white fellas, black fella story, views, the sort of bullshit that I was told when I went to school, claiming that the Aborigines were a savage race of barbarians who were dying out before being rescued from such a fate by the glorious charities of the Euro peons, the missionaries who came to try and teach Aboriginal Australians about God theory, as if the people whose religion for 26,000 years had been caring for the environment needed any pointers from some white fella from 12,000 miles away. Here's a classic example. This is a painting by Eugen von Gouraud in 1858 of the crater of Mount Eccles in Victoria. And then, after seeing what a beautiful manicured template the Aborigines had made of it, we have a look in 2007, photographed from the same place after it's been neglected for 223 years. neglected by people who were too obsessed by the potential profits of grazing and farming and mining and logging to be bothered caring for the land. And every year, on the 26th of January, the descendants of the thieves who stole this land at gunpoint expect the descendants of those whose land was stolen to either piss off and shut up and stop banging on about stuff that happened generations ago, because Australia has just such a wonderful society and economy, and they should be happy because we saved them from savagery, don't they know? Painting by John William Lewin, The Second Cataract on the North Esk near Launceston, 1809. And there you see what the Europeans have done to the same place. Just let it go to rack and bloody ruin. This one was painted by Captain Cook's expedition. It's Endeavour Bay, where he repaired his ship after wrecking it on the reef. But yeah, the people who created this grainscape, this pasture land of kangaroo grass, and maintained it free of weeds and trees by a fire regime, these people and their descendants are supposed to say thanks. That's marvellous. You stole the land. You put the topsoil at the bottom of the oceans except where you filled the rivers up with it. You cut down the trees. You fed the food plants to your bloody livestock. You shot all the birds in the sky. You caught all the fish in the ocean. And you want to be told, thank you, yahoo, yippee, Australia, Australia. And nobody's going to want to show up and hold a fake plastic corroboree to celebrate Australia Day either. I think you'll find that most Indigenous descended Australians and most Australians who give a shit and think about it closer align with the views described in Baal Belbora. Some Australians now say the stories of the massacres cannot be proven, but there are too many sound and honourable men, outstanding men, who attested in writing to substantial massacre. In any case, it is inconceivable that the Europeans would fabricate a whole series of massacres so much to their discredit and shame. The genocide of the Australian Aboriginal race is the Australian national birth stain, and this is not attributable merely to the high convict content of the early settlers. The convicts were undoubtedly criminals, if, in the main, minor criminals. Fortuitously, there was a great demand for labour in the new land and plenty of meat to eat. Under these conditions, the crime rate among the descendants of the convicts dropped to less than the rate among the free settlers. These people needed work and food. The major criminals were to be found among the squatters and the settlers. They thieved large tracts of land and, at worst, massacred the inhabitants. Many later secured this land and added to it by the illegal practice of, quote, dummying. Those who followed the first wave of settlement purchased land knowing that it had been stolen or taken by force. It is conceivable that succeeding generations purchased and inherited land without conscious thought that it really belonged to the Aboriginal people, but surely conscious thought has been suppressed. The smothered cries of conscience ignored. Those who stop and think and honestly face the situation know quite well who really owns this continent. It is not meant to suggest that the clock should be put back, that Australia could be returned to its rightful owners. That is quite impossible. But it is necessary to establish an honest base for reparation and atonement, to open this covered drain so that it may be sweetened by sun and rain. To continue to cover over this woeful crime brackets us with Stalin and Hitler. It should not be forgotten that the major thief was the Crown, so that reparation should come from the Crown. Australia was taken in the name of the King of Great Britain. The government of the day then sold or granted portions to the settlers, but the squatters did not wait for this. They raced ahead of settlement, and at worst, squatters and settlers massacred the tribes when, starving and outraged, they speared stock and stockmen. Descendants of scoundrels who plundered and murdered a whole nation of good people have set themselves up as the Australian landed aristocracy and have been accepted as such. The social crawler goes on his belly before them. If the Olympic Games fielded an event for crawlers, a team could be selected from among these people to bring back the gold medal. So saith Geoffrey Blomfield in Baal Belbora, which means when the dancing is finished. And people wonder, Why I use trespassing sheep for archery practice while I hand feed the kangaroos and swamp wallabies and birds. Maybe because with one moon-tanned whitefoot and one sun-tanned brownfoot, I just don't fit in Australian society at all. Ciao.